I'm old now, really old. My fingers are twisted. My back is bent. Time has curved me. But it didn't take everything, because some things time just can't erase. They're still here, carved deep into our soul. I don't remember the day I was born, not even the first name they gave me, but I remember the day I saw my mother being whipped right in front of me like it was yesterday. And when I close my eyes, I still hear the sound, that sharp snap of leather cutting through the air, and then her skin. I was just a boy, but I grew up in that moment. I grew up crooked, like a trampled tree that insists on living. You want to know my story? Then sit down. Listen with an open heart, because what I have to tell you isn't in any book. It's in my bones, in my memories, and in the scars that never left my mother's skin. My childhood had no rag dolls, no playful games. What I had was mud on my feet, and bites on the way to the fields, and hunger pounding in my stomach. I grew up in the slave quarters, there, close to the others, cramped in the dark, sharing a patch of bare ground with more people than they could hold. The roof was made of straw and didn't stop the leaks. When it rained, water trickled down the mud walls, and we huddled in the corner, holding each other, trying to sleep to the sound of the rain hitting harder than our hearts. And when the sun came back, the mud turned to dust, and the dust clung to our skin. It felt like the slave quarters tried to swallow us, little by little, a piece each day. I don't remember the smell of cake or parties. The smell of my childhood was sweat, animal waste, and burnt leather on the whipping poles. I heard the screams of punishment before I even learned to speak, and each scream taught more than any word. I learned to listen with fear, to walk without making noise, to obey without understanding why. Days began while it was still dark. Before the rooster crowed, the overseer was already walking by with his whip in hand, yelling for us to get up. And we got up, children, elders, women with babies. In their arms, no one rested. My mother carried me in the early years, left me in the corner of the fields, between the sugarcane stumps. Sometimes I stayed there alone all day, crying softly so no one would hear. The sound of the hoe hitting the ground was the only lullaby. I knew when I got a little older, I didn't need a lullaby anymore. I went along with the others, small hands trying to pull roots, learning to plant, weed, cut. I was about 6 when I started working for real. The overseers didn't care if a hand belonged to a child or a grown man. They wanted work, and if they didn't see it, the whip came without asking twice. Food came in a big pot, and each person grabbed what they could with their hands. It was cornmeal mush, sometimes a thin bean broth, almost always cold. Meat was for white folks' celebrations. We dreamed of bones. When we found a hard piece of meat with gristle, it was luck. Our stomachs growled, and we learned not to complain. Complaining was dangerous. Eating in silence kept us alive. There was an old woman named Bibiana who watched the children. When the mothers were out in the fields, she was the only one who smiled with her eyes. She said the eyes could speak truths. The mouth didn't dare. She told stories in whispers. At night, when the overseer was asleep, stories of distant kingdoms, of African gods, of people who turned into animals to escape their masters. I listened quietly, eyes wide in the dark, believing that one day I'd turn into a bird and fly away. In the slave quarters, we learned what silence was. Silence not to get beaten, silence to hide pain, silence to stay sane. Night fell like a heavy blanket, and we lay side by side, squeezed together, hearing the rats run and the nightmares escaping in whispers. Many children died young. Sometimes a mother would wake up and her child wasn't breathing. She'd cry, without a sound, bury without a prayer, go back to work with a broken chest. I didn't know what planning was, but we invented ways to distract ourselves. We scratched the ground with sticks, raced mango seeds, played with pebbles. Anything that wasn't pain, we clung to it. A stolen laugh was almost a treasure, a reminder that even under the weight of the world, there was still a child inside. U.S., the days were all the same, but the nights had different smells, sometimes of hope, sometimes of despair. When someone ran away, the slave quarters trembled with fear, because one's escape meant punishment for everyone, and still, some took the risk. I heard stories of those who tried, those who got caught, those who disappeared and were never heard from again. Each one of them was a piece of the dream we still fed. Time passed and I grew up. My body hardened with the work, but the boy inside me never had space to be a real boy. My childhood was stolen, sold along with my sweat. And even so, I tried to hold on to memories of my mother covering me with a thin cloth on cold nights, giving me a small piece of cassava in secret, caressing me with her eyes while her hands were too wounded to touch. In the slave quarters, I learned to survive, to measure silence, to escape with my eyes. I learned to recognize the sound of each of the overseer's steps, the tone of voice that came before punishment, the smell of wet earth that brought a brief joy, even if only for seconds. I didn't have school, no paper, no pencil, but I learned to read gestures, to decode the world through others' eyes. I learned more there than many white folks ever did in a school bench. Today, looking back, I see it wasn't just me. Every child in that slave quarters was a suffocated universe. We shared the same ground, the same pot, the same fear, but we also shared dreams, silent dreams, hidden deep in our souls, that no one could steal. Not the master, not the whip, not even death. My mother was the most precious thing I had, and not just because she gave me life. It was because she kept me alive, even when the world did everything it could to take my breath away. Her name was Jonah, but inside the slave quarters, no one used real names. They called her Black Jonah, or just that strong black woman. But to me she was everything: mother, father, sister, shelter, courage, voice. The world could collapse outside, but if I had her arms around me, nothing truly touched me. She wasn't one to talk much, but her eyes said everything. When she looked at me, I felt important, even if the rest of the world treated me like a thing. She had this way of fixing my torn cloth, of covering me with her own scarf when the cold hit. That made me believe there was still love in that place of pain. And that, my son, that was worth more than gold. That love kept me whole when everything else around tried to break me. Jonah worked all day, without rest. She was the master's washerwoman and sometimes helped in the kitchen. She bent her back over cold basins, scrubbed clothes until her fingers bled, but came back to the slave quarters and still found time to give me a smile. A tired smile, yes, but a real one. When she smiled, it was like the world got lighter for a second, and a second of lightness in that life was already a miracle. She made a point of teaching me things she said no white man would ever teach. She taught me to pray quietly, showed me the names of wild plants, told me which root cured pain and which leaf helped with fever. One day she showed me a stone and said, "This came from Grandma's land, across the sea. It's small, but it carries the strength of those who survived," and I believed her. I carried that stone in the pocket of my torn pants for a long time, like it was a talisman. Mother was my safe harbor, even when there was no sea. She held me firmly when I trembled with fear, taught me to lower my eyes at the right time, but also to keep my heart standing tall. "You're more than what they say," she would repeat while running her fingers through my curly hair. And those words simple the way only a mother can speak, stayed with me all my life. They were like seeds planted in dry soil, waiting for the rain on nights of pain. She made me sleep with old lullabies, sung in a language I didn't understand, but felt songs about black kings, warrior mothers, people who danced to drive away evil. She sang slowly, with a hoarse voice, eyes lost in the dark, and I curled up in her chest, feeling her heart beat in a rhythm of hope. That quiet, stubborn hope only those who suffer know how to keep. She was firm but sweet. When I misbehaved, she pulled my ear, but never out of anger. It was fear. Fear that one of my mistakes would catch the overseer's attention. Fear that I'd be punished. Once I dropped a bucket of water from the well, and she hit me with a vine stick. I cried more from the shock than from pain. But later, that night, she cried with me. She apologized, saying she'd rather be the one to hit me than watch the whip of another leave a mark. That day I understood what raw love was. Jonah was not just my mother. She cared for the other children too, gave food from her own plate, sewed clothes for the little ones, sang so everyone could sleep. It was like her heart was bigger than her chest. She carried the world on her back, but never let anyone fall. Alone, everyone respected my mother. Even the elders went silent when she spoke, because they knew there was wisdom in her, even if she had never learned to read. She had this way of looking at the sky and knowing if it would rain. She knew when to plant, when to harvest, when to hide. When someone planned to escape, it was her they came to ask if it was a good night. She never betrayed anyone. She preferred the silence of protection to the noise of cowardice. And even knowing that each act of help could cost her life, she kept going, because to her, living was resisting, and resisting meant taking care of others. I'll never forget the day I came back with a wounded foot bleeding. I had cut it on a shard of glass on the way to the fields. She stopped everything, picked me up, washed it with hot water and leaves. Then she used honey she had hidden and wrapped it with a clean cloth. She stayed by my side all night, whispering softly to ease the pain. And when the pain was gone, what stayed was the memory of that care, of that quiet love she had for me. On the saddest days, she taught me to laugh softly, so as not to draw attention. Laugh, yes, even in pain, because, she said, if laughter died, the soul died too. She told me, they've already taken our bodies, don't let them take our souls. Toot my son. And I kept that phrase deep in my chest, like a relic, because that's what she did. Turn simple words into invisible shields so my soul wouldn't get lost. Today, so many years later, I close my eyes and still smell her embrace, a scent of ash soap, sweat, and rue leaves. It was in that smell that I found peace. It was there I slept, even when the world seemed to fall apart. And it's there I return, every time the memory becomes too heavy. Some days you can feel that evil is in the air. The sky feels heavy. The ground resists your steps. The wind blows crooked, like it's warning you. And that day, I felt all of it before the sun even rose. It was like the night itself had come to tell us something bad was about to happen. I woke up with a tight chest, a bitter taste in my mouth, and the feeling that the world was about to spin the wrong way. We woke up earlier than usual. The overseer was pacing back and forth, more nervous than normal. The dogs barked non-stop, and even the master's horses seemed restless. When my mother woke me, her face was serious, quieter than usual. She didn't say a word, just pulled me close, adjusted my cloth, and hugged me tight, a quick hug, but full of something I couldn't name at the time. Now I know she already sensed what was coming. The sky wasn't cloudy from rain. It was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that screams. No one looked each other in the eye. No one laughed, No one whispered. Even the birds seemed to have vanished. We went to work without saying a word. Our bodies light with hunger, but our hearts heavy with fear. The overseers yelled louder, stomped harder, dragged the reins like they were setting a stage. Everything felt harsher that day, colder, more threatening. I don't remember what I ate that morning. I think I didn't eat anything. I only remember the emptiness in my stomach and in my soul. The beatings started earlier. A boy had dropped a basket of corn and was whipped right there in front of everyone. That wasn't unusual, but that day, there was something different in the way they hit. They hit with anger, with pleasure, like they were warming up for something worse. Like that punishment was just a rehearsal. My mother didn't let me leave her side. Wherever she went, I followed. Even the overseer noticed, but he said nothing. She worked with her eyes wide open to the world. With every step, she looked around. Like an animal sniffing a trap, something was in the air, a thick mood, like smoke. And when we returned to the quarters at noon, it was darker than ever. Not even the sunlight through the cracks came in. It felt like the shadow had come down to stay. After a short rest, everyone was called to the front of the big house. When the bell rang, we all shivered. Bells meant gathering, and a gathering was never good. It always came with an example. An example in the master's mouth meant pain. We walked in line, heads down, measured steps. The yard was empty in the center, but the whipping post had a rope hanging. That said everything. The overseers formed a circle. The master came later, dark suit, hat on his head, and that look of someone who doesn't see people, only property. He stopped and said a few words I can't remember. He talked about order, about discipline, about respect. He spoke like someone carving pain with words. And then he said the name, Jonah, my mother. The ground disappeared beneath my feet. I didn't understand. Jonah, my mother. Why? What had she done? I started to shake. She froze for a moment too. Then she stood up. She didn't cry, didn't beg. She walked slowly to the post, like someone who knew fate couldn't be changed by screaming. Like someone who had already died inside many times before. The crowd stepped aside. I wanted to run, to scream, to stop it, but someone held me. A strong, thick arm. I don't remember who. I only remember the smell of sweat and the force that locked me in place. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was like my voice had been stolen. My mother looked at me. A quick, deep glance. A plea for silence. A gesture of protection. I understood. I couldn't do anything, only watch. The overseer tied her wrists. He ripped her dress down the back with a dull knife. She didn't scream. She stood there, bare from the waist up, her back straight like a pole. The whip cracked in the air. The first lash echoed. The second came harder. The third drew blood. And the silence that fell after the fourth was louder than any scream. I couldn't breathe. She held strong through the first ones. Then she moaned. Then she screamed. I had never heard that sound come from her. It was more than pain. It was shame, desperation, her soul being torn along with her skin. Her back split open. Blood ran, mixed with sweat, and the overseer kept going. Each lash was a sentence, a cruelty. Women cried, men turned their faces. Children hid in their mothers' skirts, but no one moved. Fear was a monster holding everyone by the feet. And me, watching my mother be torn apart before my eyes. Powerless, voiceless, like a part of me died with every crack of that whip when it ended. Her body hung limp, like a wet cloth, but she was still alive, breathing deeply, painfully. And her eyes weren't defeated. They were tired, but not broken. I've never seen the gaze so strong. And that That final look she gave me before they carried her away stayed forever in my soul. The rest of the day passed in fog. I don't remember how I got back to the quarters. I only remember curling up in the corner, my face in my hands, wishing I could disappear. The sky darkened early, night came heavy, and I cried quietly so no one would hear. My mother didn't speak for days. She could barely move, but she survived. Survived like only mothers do for their children and me. I was never the same after that day. If this story touched something in you, leave a comment, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear. There's still a lot that must be remembered, and you can help keep every memory alive. There are things you see only once in your life, but carry forever. My mother's blood running down her back was one of those things. It never left my memory. Not even now, old as I am, with white hair, scarred skin, and bones begging for rest. I still remember. I remember the smell, the color, the pain that wasn't on my body but hurt as if it were. When the first drop of blood ran down her torn skin, it felt like someone had opened a river inside me. I froze. The blood was thick, dark red, warm, almost alive. It dripped slowly at first, then thickened, keeping pace with the lashes. With every crack of the whip, a new wound opened. Her skin, once smooth and firm, turned into a map of pain. And there I was, a boy, watching it all and being torn apart inside without taking a single blow. I remember the sunlight hitting her back just right, and the blood shining like wet paint. It gleamed, running along the curves of her body, down her waist, dripping onto her legs, falling onto the packed dirt floor. It formed small dark pools that were soon trampled or absorbed by the dry earth. But before that, I saw every drop, every single one. The worst part wasn't the blood, it was the sound it made. Yes, blood makes a sound when it falls, a muffled, small, almost imperceptible sound. But that day, in the silence that settled around us, I heard it. The noise of drops hitting the ground was like a clock marking the time of suffering. Tick, tock, tick tock. It was her life running out, marking the time of cruelty. I wanted to scream, to throw myself in the middle, cover her with my body, take her place, but I couldn't. My legs wouldn't obey, my chest locked up, and my throat was as dry as ash. Everything inside me wanted to fight back, but fear was greater, and that's what slavery did to us. It taught us to swallow our instincts, to kill our impulses, to stay silent even when our hearts screamed. My mother cried quietly. She didn't scream in despair. She didn't call for help. She let out some moans, short sobs between lashes. Sometimes her eyes closed for seconds, as if she was leaving that place for a moment. Maybe she was. Maybe she fled inside herself to endure it. Maybe she thought of me, not to leave me alone. I don't know. I only know I saw her body resisting when there was no reason left to resist. After they released her, she fell to her knees. Blood kept flowing, even without more lashes. And I saw her back, open, cut like meat at the butcher's. I saw welts rising from her skin, the parts where exposed flesh shone in the sunlight. And I saw blood mixing with sweat, with dust, and it all looked like a painting of hell, a scene no child should witness, much less a powerless child. She was carried away. Two men helped, slowly, and I followed behind, stumbling over my own feet with every step. I saw drops marking the way, small red stains on the ground, a trail, as if her body left her pain scattered behind like crumbs of suffering. I counted the marks without realizing it. 1, 2, 3, until we reached the slave quarters. Inside, they laid her on an old cloth. The women ran, fetched water, brought leaves, honey, lard, everything they knew to use to heal old pain. I sat beside her, saying nothing. I held her hand. It was cold, cold as stone, and that scared me, because my mother always had warm hands. Hands that worked, that comforted, that protected. But that day, they seemed like hands of someone leaving. The women began cleaning the wounds. When they wiped her with the damp cloth, she moaned, biting a rag in her mouth to keep from screaming. I watched that and felt my throat close. Blood kept coming out slowly. It stained everything. The cloth, the ground, the women's hands, my clothes. And I stayed there, dirty with her blood, as if it were a mark that glued me to her forever. That night, no one slept. The slave quarters were silent. Only my mother's labored breathing, and my muffled crying could be heard. I cried like I never cried before in my life. It wasn't just sadness. It was revolt, helplessness, guilt. I felt like I should have done something, anything, but I didn't. And that guilt haunted me for years, still haunts me, because seeing someone you love bleed and not being able to stop it is a kind of torture that scars the soul. Her wound took weeks to heal, but mine never healed, because my mother's blood didn't stay only on her body. It stayed in me, in my gaze, in my memory, in my choices. It was that blood that taught me what injustice was. It was there I understood what cold, calculated evil meant, made with the intention to dominate. And it was there also that my promise to never forget was born. After that day, everything changed inside me. The boy I was died there. In that yard, in his place, another was born, quieter, more attentive, tougher. I still obeyed, still smiled when told to. But inside, I had turned to stone, stone covered in blood, stone that carried my mother's name engraved in every crack. Today, telling this, I feel the same metallic taste in my mouth. The memory returns with smell, with color, with weight, and I tell it not to evoke pity, but to remember that there was a time when the blood of a black mother was worth nothing to the landowners. But to me, it was worth the whole world. Do you know what hurt me the most back then? It wasn't the exhaustion, the hunger, the cold of the slave quarters, or the burning sun on my back. It was the helplessness, knowing that no matter how much my heart revolted, my body couldn't react, that my eyes saw, my ears heard, but my hands remained still, and not by my choice, but because fear bound us like invisible chains. I was just a boy, yes, but my soul felt everything with the weight of an adult. I saw overseers beating, spitting, humiliating, and I couldn't do a thing, not a gesture, not a word, because one wrong look was enough to be the next to taste. The whip, slavery was that, a cage where the body moved but the soul lived in chains. When I saw my mother being dragged, crying softly, leaving blood along the way, my instinct screamed inside me. I wanted to run, to jump on the overseer, to bite, to scratch, to kick. But all I could do was cry, a silent cry, with clenched fist and locked jaw. Fear kept my feet glued to the ground, and I hated myself for that. Hated myself for not being strong, not being a man, not being free. The worst violence wasn't just what they did to our bodies, it was what they did to our will. They even stole that from us, the courage to fight, because they knew that to keep captivity standing, it wasn't enough to bind the arms. They had to break the spirit, and that's what they did to many of us, not all, but many. I remember once, one of ours tried to fight back. A strong man from Angola named Joaquim. He was tall, brave, never bowed his head. One day he saw an overseer hit a pregnant woman. He couldn't take it. He jumped on the man, brought him down. The overseer screamed, called the others. They came with sticks, with ropes. They beat Joaquim until he passed out. Then they hung him upside down in front of the big house. He stayed there 2 days. On the 3rd, he died. After that, no one dared raise a hand. The message was clear, and I understood it, understood that inside, I could hate, wish for revenge, pray for justice. But on the outside, I had to smile and lower my head. That was slavery, not just chains on the body, but a gag on the soul. When I sat beside my mother, cleaning her wounds, I felt my chest explode with rage. I looked at her, so strong, so warm, and wanted to scream at the world, wanted to ask God why, wanted to take justice into my own hands. But all I did was wet a cloth and wipe blood. It was my way of fighting, in silence, with care, with love, and that helplessness shaped me. I grew up like that, learning to swallow every injustice, to hide every tear, to mask every fury. We became stone on the outside and volcano on the inside, and that, over time, makes you sick. The soul gets sick, because it's not natural to live seeing evil and not be able to face it. It's not natural to see a brother being dragged and keep planting like nothing is happening. There were days I asked myself, will this ever change? Will I die like this? Watching and unable to act, will someone ever break these invisible chains? And every time that question rose up, I silenced it, because thinking too much was dangerous. Feeling too much was dangerous. Even dreaming was dangerous. They didn't want us to dream, because dreaming is the first step to freedom. But I never stopped dreaming. Even helpless, even silent, my heart didn't surrender. Every time I saw injustice, I felt it. I hurt, I suffered inside. And I think that's what kept me human, because many shut down inside to avoid pain. But I chose to suffer and keep feeling, because feeling is what separates us from them. They beat, but didn't feel. We were beaten, but we loved, and that was strength. The feeling of helplessness followed me for a long time, in labor, in punishments, in separations. I saw fathers ripped from children. I saw pregnant women being sold. I saw children crying in corners, calling for mother, calling for father, and no one could do anything, not even a hug, not even comfort. We just had to keep going, pretend it didn't hurt, pretend we didn't see, but the pain stayed in the eyes, in the skin, in the heart. And even after freedom came, and came as a broken, poorly fulfilled promise, that feeling didn't go away completely, because freedom arrived. But fear remained, the fear of speaking, of taking up space, of being human. It took me a long time to understand that I could raise my voice, that I could tell my story, that I could finally turn my helplessness into words. That's why I tell it today. I tell it so we don't forget. I tell it so others, who may have never felt what I felt, can know what it was. And above all, I tell it so that no child ever has to see their mother bleed without being able to do anything. No child should live with that weight. No human being should. Helplessness was my companion for a long time. But today, here, speaking with you, I break it. With every word, I rise. With every memory, I bring justice. It's not revenge, it's memory. And memory is the most powerful weapon a people can have, because those who remember resist, and those who resist are no longer slaves. Asterisk, the body forgets a lot of things, but some marks never fade. I carry those marks to this day. And I'm not talking only about the ones you can see. I'm talking about the ones hidden deep, the kind you can't cut or burn away. The scars born of fear, of shame, of rage swallowed dry, some not even death can erase. My mother's back, for example, was permanently scarred. Each wound became a crooked line on her skin, like someone had written on her, in blood, the story of an entire people. When I was little, I used to trace those scars with my fingers. Each one told a piece of her life, and every time I touched them, she closed her eyes. Not in pain but in memory, because scars remember too. I didn't come out of it without my own. I remember my first punishment. It was for spilling a bucket of water. The water soaked into the dirt and vanished like it never existed. But the punishment stayed. 3 lashes on the legs. They hurt so much I couldn't walk right for days. Then came the fever. Then, the scar. It's still here. A thick dark line, just above the knee. Every time I touch it, it feels like time rewinds. Slavery was a time of scars. Each of us carried our own. There was an old man, Baltazar, who had a cut across his face. They said he tried to escape once, and the overseer sliced his cheek just to prove no one got away. He lived with that crooked face, but his gaze was whole, steady, hard, like stone. That was how he kept the scar from winning over his soul. There were also the scars you couldn't see, but could feel. The sound of the whip, for example. For years, every time I heard a loud snap, my body would tremble. Instinctively, my heart would race, my breath would stop. Even after I was old, even after freedom came, a sharp sound or a scream in the woods would bring it all back. Once, I dreamed I was back in the slave quarters, watching my mother being taken. I woke up drenched in sweat, chest tight, eyes wet. This was long after I'd left the plantation, and still, the past came back. Because the body can leave captivity, but captivity takes longer to leave the body. The scars left on women were countless too, not just the ones on the body but those from what was taken from them. I saw women ripped from their newborns. I saw young girls taken by force, without a chance to say no, and afterward, they had to smile, pretend it was normal. Some went mad, others never spoke again. Those were invisible wounds, but they burned from the inside. I remember Dandara. She had a scar on her chest, on the left side. They said she tried to stop them from taking her son, held him so tight they had to tear him away. A foreman hit her with iron, and the mark stayed, a deep, dark gash that never fully healed. But she walked tall, always, as if to say, the mark is here. But it didn't break me, and that taught me a lot. I learned that scars aren't a sign of weakness, quite the opposite. They are proof of survival. Each one of mine reminds me that I endured, that I resisted, that I didn't die, that even with everything, I kept going. Some days, I run my hand over them just to remember I'm alive, and that the blood that made me came from those who fought. But there's something else no one says. Sometimes we get attached to our scars. Sounds strange, but it's true. We get used to the pain, learn to live with it, and when it no longer throbs, there's an emptiness, a strange silence, like something is missing. Because when you've lived so long wounded, peace feels unfamiliar. Over time, I realized those marks are also warnings. They remind us of what was, of what must never be again. They're like signs along the path, saying, here, too much blood was spilled. And that matters, because the world tries to forget, tries to erase. But the one who carries the scar is living proof. I am one of those witnesses. The other day, a child asked me about the mark on my arm. I stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then I showed it to her, gently, and I told her how I got that mark, what it meant. She listened in silence, eyes wide open. In the end, she hugged me, and in that hug, I felt that yesterday's pain was helping to teach tomorrow. That's why I no longer hide my scars. I once tried to cover them, to disguise them, to forget them. But now, I understand they're part of me, part of my story, part of our story. And as long as I'm alive, they'll live too, not as open wounds, but as memory etched into flesh. Slavery tried to erase us, tried to tear our skin, our language, our faith, but it failed, because even cut, we remain whole, because our scars tell what they tried to hide. And every time I tell this, I'm showing a wound that became strength, that became word, that became truth. The scars never disappeared, but today, they don't bring me shame. They give me pride, because each one is a silent victory, a reminder that, despite everything, I'm still here, strong, speaking, remembering, and that, my child, that no overseer ever managed to take from me, asterisk. During years, I learned to live without hope. Freedom was a forbidden word, almost magical. Those who talked too much about it disappeared. Those who dreamed to high woke up with lashes on their backs. But there was a day, a single day, when the wind seemed to change, and I felt it deep in my chest. I felt that freedom might be near. It wasn't certainty, nor promise, just a scent in the air, a spark lit in the dark. But it was enough to ignite my soul. That day started like all the others. I woke up before the sun, with a heavy body, swollen feet, my stomach rolling. I went to the sugarcane field as always, head down, hoe in hand, silence in my mouth. The overseer was more nervous than usual, looking round, yelling louder. That caught my attention. We learned to notice the small changes, because sometimes in them lived the difference between life and death. That's when I heard whispers, not from the whites, but from our own, a whisper here, another there. Glances exchanged with hope. An old man, who always walked in silence, grabbed my arm during the water break, and he spoke very softly, barely, moving his lips. They're saying on other plantations, they're freeing the captives. They're saying the empire is going to end this. My heart pounded. I felt a chill in my stomach. In that moment, I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. I wanted to believe, but I held it in, because we were afraid even to believe. So many empty promises had been thrown into our ears. So many false rumors, traps to make us rebel and then be massacred. But that day felt different. It was the way the overseers looked at each other. They were nervous, insecure. It was rare to see white men afraid. That made me think, maybe it was true. At lunch, under the mango tree, I heard more. A boy who served in the big house said the master had received a letter. That he slammed the door hard, told everyone to stop talking about it. That the lady of the house cried. That rumor spread like fire on dry straw. Each whisper fed the flame, but we still couldn't speak out loud. It was a secret shared through looks and silences. I remember looking at the sky that day. It was clear, blue, with soft clouds passing slowly. And I thought, will I wake up free tomorrow? Will I be able to walk down the road without being hunted? Will I be able to choose where to sleep, what to eat, who to live with? Will my mother, who had already passed, look down from above and say, "My son, you made it"? That night, lying on the hard floor of the slave quarters, no one slept. Our eyes were open, shining in the dark. We didn't speak, but we knew. Everyone felt it. It was as if a new presence had entered, something we had never seen, but always wished for. Freedom, and even if it hadn't arrived yet, the possibility. of it already changed everything. It was as if, for a moment, the captivity had cracked. The next morning, I went to the field and noticed something else. The birds, they sang louder. Or maybe I had just never listened properly. The sound of nature felt more alive. And then I realized even my body hurt less. It was as if my soul said, just hold on a little longer, it's close. And I held on. We all did. The overseer kept giving orders, but his eyes revealed fear. He knew his time was running out. In the following days, rumors became news. Soldiers came from the city. The masters gathered, locked inside the big house. The tension was visible. Then one night, the overseer called us. For the first time, he spoke in a low voice. Without shouting, he said a law had been signed, that slavery had ended, that we were free. He spoke as if he wanted the news to hurt us. But the word free fell like blessed rain on dry soil. No one shouted. No one celebrated right away. The silence was deep, a silence full of held back tears, interrupted lives, buried stories. The freedom we had dreamed of so much had arrived, and it seemed unbelievable. I looked at my callous hands and asked myself, what will I do with them now that they no longer have to cut cane by force? I looked up at the sky and said just one thing, thank you, my mother. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat outside the slave quarters, looking at the moon. I was no longer a prisoner. I was a man, still poor, still lost, still scarred, but free. And in that moment, I realized how strange freedom is. It frightens, because we lived in prison for so long that when they remove the chains, we don't even know where to go. But still, it's better to be lost in freedom than to know the path of captivity. The day I felt that freedom was near wasn't the same day it arrived, but it was the day my heart understood that the impossible could happen. It was the day my chest filled with air like never before. The day fear gave way to hope, and that, my son, that was already a form of liberation. When they said we were free, the world seemed to change in an instant. But the freedom they promised wasn't the one we had dreamed of. It was a hard, raw freedom, full of traps. The paper of the law said one thing, but what the day-to-day brought was another story. The promise of freedom clashed with reality, and that reality had sharp teeth. At first, many of us didn't know what to do. We were so used to imposed order, to the invisible chains that bound us, that walking free without direction was like sailing a sea with no compass. There was no work, no home, no clear place to go. The plantation was still there, with the same land, but the former masters no longer had patience for us. Some tried to cultivate their own land, but were almost always expelled by those claiming it was private property. Others tried to come together to work as a group, but distrust, fear, and hunger weighed heavily. With no money, no support, and often not even knowing how to read or write, our freedom was like a weak fire on a windy night, hard to keep burning. And the overseers, they kept playing their games. Many traded open violence for other forms of oppression. They now worked as bosses, but the treatment remained harsh. The punishments took new shapes. Hunger, despair, lack of assistance all became the new shackles many of us carried. I lived that in my own skin. I left the plantation with my heart full of hope, but no direction. The city seemed like a strange and hostile place. I wanted to work. I wanted to build a life, but doors kept closing. I was black, formerly enslaved, with no possessions. To many, I was just cheap labor, and when they could, they drove me away with insults and threats. And the government promises land for those who had been enslaved, compensation. Little of that reached us. What we received, mostly, were empty words and disillusionment. The structure of society was still built to keep us on the margins, legal. Freedom didn't mean real equality. Racism and prejudice were chains you couldn't see, but they still choked us. I remember nights when, exhausted, lying under the stars, I asked the sky, is this freedom? Is this what they gave us? The answer never came easily, but with time, I began to understand that true freedom is not a decree, not a law. It is one day by day, through struggle, through pain, through persistence. It was a hard lesson, learning to be free in a world that doesn't want us to be. Learning to hold our heads high despite suspicious eyes, closed doors, denied opportunities. Learning that the road to freedom is long and full of stones, but it was also the time when we began to build our own communities, our own schools, our own churches, our own markets, places where we could breathe a little deeper, be who we were without fear. It was the time when, even wounded, we stood back up to fight for our rights and our dignity. What came after the word free was an awakening, a difficult awakening that required courage and strength, because freedom, for us, was never handed over. It was seized, won, shaped with sweat and tears, and that truth is the one I carry with me to this day. After everything I have lived, after so many sleepless nights where fear and hope mixed in my chest, I began to understand that my story is not just mine. It is the reflection of the lives of thousands who came before me, who fought without a voice, who suffered without a chance. It is also the story of all those who still walk this tortuous path of seeking true freedom and dignity. The legacy I carry with me is not only made of suffering, but mainly of resistance. It is the silent and firm fight that runs in the veins of my blood and in the blood of those who never gave up, who refused to accept invisibility, oppression, and silence. Every scar on my body, every bitter memory of my enslaved childhood and youth, is a symbol of my existence, my struggle, and my victory, even if that victory is not yet recognized by everyone. When I look back, I see that I was not just a victim of circumstances. I was a warrior, a builder, a man who never let himself be bent by suffering, because true freedom is not a right won in a single day. It is a commitment taken for life, a commitment to honor those who came before us, to educate the generations to come, and to never forget the hard lessons of the past so they do not repeat. I want each of you listening to understand the weight and importance of this legacy, to know your stories, your roots, even if they are hard to face, to not fear the truth, no matter how harsh and painful it may seem, because it is in the truth that lies the power to change the present and build a better future. A future where no one will be a slave to prejudice, racism, exclusion, and ignorance anymore. Freedom, my friends, is not something I carry just for myself. It belongs to everyone who has the courage to dream, to fight, and to stand firm in the face of adversity. The struggle of my ancestors did not end the day the chains fell. It remains alive, beating in our daily battles for respect, justice, and dignity. And that is why I ask you, on the other side, with an open heart, to walk with me on this journey. If you want to hear more stories that reveal the strength, truth, and beauty of a people who never let themselves be defeated, if you want to be part of this legacy of resistance and hope, subscribe to the channel. Every subscription is not just a click, it is a voice that joins our story, a light that shines against the darkness of oblivion. Your presence here strengthens the chain that unites past, present, and future. It is not a number, it is a collective commitment to keep alive the memory of those who suffered, to honor their sacrifices, and to celebrate the achievements still to come. Do not let this story die. Subscribe, share, and help spread this message so that no one forgets that freedom is a right for all, and the fight for it is our greatest legacy. I end with a certainty I carry deep in my chest. As long as there is someone willing to listen, to learn, to fight, freedom will keep growing. And so, the memory of those who came before will never be erased. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for being part of this journey that, I hope, will lead us to a better future. This is the legacy I leave for you, a legacy that does not weigh, but strengthens, a legacy that reminds us that even in the darkest shadows, the light of freedom never goes out. Asterisk, please leave your like and comment below. Every gesture from you helps preserve this precious memory and keep alive the stories that shape our identity and our fight for justice. It is essential that these voices are not lost in time, because to remember is to resist. Your engagement strengthens this chain of hope and transformation. Asterisk, and don't stop here. Watch other stories on the channel, especially the videos in our playlist, where we share many journeys of courage, pain, and overcoming. The playlist link is in the description or comments below. Each story is one more step in this journey of memory and struggle. Come continue with us, because together we are stronger.